Hi, today we are talking about complex sentences. So before we begin, we will review a little about some phrases and words that we need. So as a reminder, a clause is a group of words that contain a subject and a verb. Look at these sentences below and decide which one is a clause and which one is not a clause. Remember, a clause must have a subject and a verb. So all of these are clauses except number 1. Every Saturday at 8 a.m. There is no verb in this sentence. I don't know what happens. I don't know what the action is. There's also no subject in this sentence. There's no noun that is doing something. So this group of words is called a phrase. It's a group of words, but it doesn't have a subject and a verb. Instead, this is acting like an adverb phrase. All of these other sentences have a subject, like I, and a verb, like meet. Take a look at these sentences and see if you can find the clauses. Some of these have one clause and some will have more than one clause. If we look at these sentences, we can see the different clauses. The first sentence has one clause. Most people, that's our subject. Have, that's our verb. A few close friends, that's our predicate. Down here, it says some people believe that it is easier for women to make friends than men. So in this sentence, we have two subjects, some people and it, and two verbs, believe and is. These other sentences also have two subjects and two verbs. Therefore, they have two sets of clauses in them. Now, there are different types of clauses. The two main general types of clauses are independent and dependent. So if we look at these independent clauses, most people have a few close friends, some people believe. Many men also have close relationships. Then over here we have some dependent clauses, that it is easier for women than men to make close friends, although women may share their feelings more. Now, oftentimes, people ask, what's the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause? An independent clause is like an adult. They can be on their own. They can be their own sentence. Just like an adult, they are independent. They don't need anybody else. But dependent clauses cannot be alone. They are like a small child. They cannot be their own sentence. They must always be with an adult. So dependent clauses will always be in a sentence with an independent clause. So that means that these clauses right here on the dependent side, these are not complete sentences. They cannot be on their own. If you write something like this, it must be attached to an independent clause to be a full sentence. So how do we know which clause is independent and which is dependent? One answer you might get is that dependent clauses are not complete thoughts. Therefore, they cannot be on their own. But knowing what is a complete thought in a second language is really challenging. So there's another trick that we can use. Dependent clauses also start with words that are called subordinating conjunctions. So words like that and although. These are subordinating conjunctions, and they tell us that they come before a dependent clause. They actually make it dependent. So these words like that and although, they make this clause dependent, like a child. So to review, dependent clauses are not a complete sentence. They cannot stand on their own. They start with a subordinating conjunction. Here is a list of some subordinating conjunctions. If you see words like this and they come before a clause, then you know it is a dependent clause. Look at these sentences on the left. Find the dependent clauses. So for example, I call my friend when I have a bad day. I is a subject and call is a verb. So that's a clause. I is a subject and have is a verb. So this is another clause. When is a subordinating conjunction. So that means when I have a bad day is a dependent clause. You can see that for the rest of the sentences. When, even though, when, if. These are all subordinating conjunctions, and they come before the dependent clause. Lastly, there are comma rules. So, when you have a dependent clause and an independent clause in the same sentence, it's called a complex sentence. Sometimes you need a comma and sometimes you don't. Here are some rules. If you have the dependent clause first, you need a comma before the independent clause. Even though we live far away from each other, comma, we support each other. However, if you have the independent clause first, you do not need a comma before the dependent clause. For example, we support each other even though we live far away from each other. These two sentences are the same, except we switched the independent and dependent clause. Complex sentences are pretty great because you can move which clause is first, depending on which information you want your reader to see first. However, if you put the dependent clause first, you must add the comma before the independent clause. So, to review, a clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a verb. There are two main types of clauses, independent and dependent. A simple sentence contains one independent clause. A compound sentence contains at least two independent clauses. And a complex sentence contains at least one independent and one dependent clause. In this presentation, we looked at complex sentences and how they are made up of these two types of clauses, independent and dependent.